Rain hammered against the studio windows in thick silver streaks, blurring the glowing lights of Los Angeles into a watercolor haze. The city outside pulsed with its usual restless energy, sirens echoing in the distance, tires hissing over soaked pavement, neon signs flickering through the storm. But inside the soundstage, exhaustion hung heavy in the air. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in a folding chair near the edge of the set, while crew members rushed around him dismantling equipment for the night. Someone laughed loudly across the room. Another assistant shouted for cables to be packed before midnight. Yet Keanu barely heard any of it. His shoulders sagged beneath a dark jacket dampened by the rain he'd walked through earlier. A half-empty cup of black coffee rested in his hands, long gone cold. After months of filming, interviews, travel, and endless public appearances, fatigue had settled deep into his bones in a way sleep no longer fixed. The makeup artist waved goodbye on her way out. Keanu offered a small, tired smile in return. "Get some rest, Keanu." "Yeah," he murmured softly. "I'll try." But rest had become unfamiliar to him. As the room slowly emptied, he stared blankly at the rain sliding down the windows. Nights like this always made memories surface, the ones he spent years trying not to revisit. Then his phone vibrated. The unfamiliar number glowed on the screen. Seattle, Washington. For a moment, he considered letting it ring out. It was late. Probably business. Another contract. Another request. Another problem waiting to be solved tomorrow. But something about the number unsettled him. He answered quietly. "Hello?" There was a pause before an older man spoke. "Mr. Reeves?" "Yes." "My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm calling from Mercer & Holt Legal Services in Seattle. I apologize for contacting you this late." Keanu straightened slightly, his brow tightening. "What's this regarding?" The man hesitated. That hesitation alone made Keanu's stomach tighten. "I'm calling about Eleanor Whitmore." The name struck him harder than he expected. Suddenly, the noise of the studio disappeared. The rain faded. Everything narrowed into silence. Eleanor. He hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in months. "She passed away peacefully yesterday evening," the lawyer continued gently. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Keanu froze. His fingers tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. For several seconds, he said nothing at all. Images flooded his mind without warning. A tiny kitchen glowing with warm yellow light. The smell of cinnamon tea. An old rocking chair creaking softly beside a window during thunderstorms. Eleanor's voice reading stories while he lay awake as a boy pretending not to be afraid of the chaos happening elsewhere in the house. He could almost hear her again. "Close your eyes, sweetheart. Tomorrow will feel lighter." Keanu swallowed hard. "How?" His voice cracked slightly. "How did it happen?" "In her sleep," the lawyer said. "Very peaceful." "Peaceful." The word somehow made it worse. He lowered his head slowly, pressing a hand against his mouth as grief crept through him like cold water. For years, Eleanor had lived alone in that quiet coastal town outside Seattle, refusing nearly everything he tried to give her. Money, a larger home, help, attention. She always laughed softly and changed the subject. "I don't need any of that, Keanu," she would tell him. "I already got the best part. Watching you grow up." And now she was gone. A deep ache opened in his chest. Fame had consumed so much of his life. Movies, flights, cameras, endless schedules. He had told himself there would always be more time to visit her properly. More holidays, more conversations. But time had quietly slipped away while he wasn't looking. The lawyer's voice interrupted his thoughts carefully. "There's another reason I called, Mr. Reeves." Keanu closed his eyes briefly. "Okay." Ms. Whitmore left very specific instructions regarding her will. A strange unease settled over him. "What kind of instructions?" "She requested your presence in Seattle for the reading." Keanu frowned faintly. "That's normal enough." "There's more," the lawyer said softly. "She insisted you come alone." Silence filled the line. Rain battered the windows harder now, the storm intensifying outside. "Alone?" Keanu repeated quietly. "Yes." Something shifted inside him then. Something subtle, but unmistakable. Eleanor had never been dramatic, never secretive without reason. His heartbeat slowed uneasily. Did she say why? No, sir. Only that it was very important. Keanu leaned back slowly in the chair, staring at the dark ceiling above him. Exhaustion suddenly vanished beneath a growing sense of dread. Then another memory surfaced. He was maybe 12 years old, sitting beside Eleanor on her porch, while ocean wind rattled the hanging chimes overhead. She had looked at him strangely that night, sad almost, and before sending him inside, she whispered words he never forgot. "One day you'll understand why I stayed." At the time, he never questioned what she meant. Now those words returned with chilling weight. The lawyer spoke again. "The reading is tomorrow afternoon. I can arrange transportation from the airport if needed." Keanu stared out at the rain-soaked city beyond the glass. "I'll be there," he said quietly. After the call ended, he remained motionless for a long time. The empty soundstage around him suddenly felt enormous, hollow. For the first time in years, the loneliness he buried beneath work and routine rose fully to the surface. Eleanor had been one of the few people who knew him before the fame, before the interviews, before the carefully controlled public image. She knew the frightened boy underneath all of it. And somehow, deep down, he felt this trip was about more than grief, more than a will. An hour later, Keanu sat alone aboard a late-night flight climbing through storm clouds toward Seattle. The cabin lights were dim, most passengers asleep around him, but he couldn't close his eyes. Because somewhere between the rain, the memories, and Eleanor's final request, a terrible feeling had taken hold inside him. The woman who helped raise him had been hiding something, and whatever it was, she had waited her entire life to tell him. The plane touched down in Seattle just before dawn. A pale gray light stretched across the horizon, blending almost seamlessly with the heavy clouds hanging over the city. Rain misted across the runway in soft waves as passengers slowly shuffled through the terminal, half asleep and silent beneath the early morning gloom. Keanu Reeves moved through the airport unnoticed beneath a dark coat and black cap, carrying only a small duffel bag over his shoulder. He welcomed the anonymity. Normally, crowded places brought whispers, cameras, strangers asking for photos. But this morning, the world felt strangely distant, as though grief itself had wrapped everything in fog. Outside, cold wind rushed off the bay and cut through his jacket immediately. A black sedan waited near the curb. The driver stepped out. "Mr. Reeves?" Keanu nodded quietly. "Mr. Mercer asked me to bring you directly to Ms. Whitmore's house first. He said you'd probably want some time there before the meeting this afternoon." For a brief second, Keanu considered refusing. Part of him wasn't ready to see the house again. Another part feared what he might feel the moment he stepped inside. But he simply nodded once more and climbed into the back seat. The drive north felt endless. Rain rolled softly against the windows while the city slowly disappeared behind them, replaced by towering evergreens and winding coastal roads. Small fishing towns emerged now and then through the mist, their docks nearly swallowed by fog. Keanu rested his head lightly against the glass, barely listening as the driver spoke about road conditions and weather. His mind was somewhere else entirely. He remembered arriving at Eleanor's home as a child during difficult nights, when his mother struggled to keep everything together. He remembered being small enough that the oversized sweaters Eleanor wore looked enormous when she hugged him. Most of all, he remembered feeling safe there. Safe in a way the rest of the world rarely allowed. The car finally turned onto a narrow road overlooking the ocean. And there it was, Eleanor's house. Time seemed to stop. The little seaside home sat exactly as he remembered it. Weathered cedar shingles, white-framed windows, a small porch facing the crashing gray waves below. Wind chimes swayed gently near the entrance, their soft, hollow music carried by the cold morning breeze. For several moments, Keanu simply stared. The driver quietly unloaded his bag and returned to the car without another word, sensing he needed to be alone. As the sedan disappeared down the road, silence settled around the house. Only the ocean remained. Keanu slowly approached the porch steps, his boots creaking against damp wood. The closer he got, the heavier his chest felt. Then he noticed something that nearly broke him instantly. Beside the front door sat Eleanor's old watering can, and the tiny blue flower pots she cared for every spring, wilted now from neglect, as though the entire house had stopped breathing the moment she did. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the spare key hidden exactly where it had always been, beneath a chipped ceramic bird beside the porch railing. Eleanor never moved it. The lock clicked softly, and the second he stepped inside, the past swallowed him whole. The scent hit him first. Old books. Tea leaves, lavender, Eleanor. The house was dim except for the pale morning light filtering through lace curtains. Everything remained frozen in time. A knitted blanket still rested over the couch arm. Reading glasses sat beside an unfinished crossword puzzle near the fireplace. Keanu stood motionless near the doorway, unable to breathe properly. It felt impossible that she wasn't here. He could almost hear her footsteps in the kitchen, almost hear her humming softly while making breakfast. His eyes wandered slowly across the room until they landed on a framed photograph sitting near the bookshelf. A much younger Eleanor smiled warmly beside a skinny, dark-haired boy no older than 8. Him. Keanu picked up the frame carefully. He remembered that day instantly. They had gone to a carnival near the pier after he spent the morning crying over a fight at home. Eleanor had bought him hot chocolate and convinced him to ride the Ferris wheel even though he was terrified of heights. He stared at the photo for a long time before whispering softly, "I should have come sooner." The words disappeared into the empty house. No answer came back. Hours seemed to drift by as he wandered slowly from room to room. Nothing had changed. Stacks of novels still lined the hallway shelves. Classical records sat neatly beside the old turntable. Even the kitchen clock still ticked with steady rhythm despite everything else feeling lifeless. Then Keanu noticed something strange. A locked drawer beneath Eleanor's writing desk. He frowned slightly. She never locked anything. Curious, he pulled gently at the handle again, but it wouldn't budge. His eyes narrowed further when he noticed several neatly stacked envelopes nearby, each one marked only with a handwritten letter. K. A chill moved through him. He picked one up carefully but stopped himself before opening it. Instead, his attention drifted toward another object sitting alone on the piano bench across the room. An old cassette tape. A small white label had been attached to it in Eleanor's familiar handwriting. For Keanu, only after I'm gone. His throat tightened immediately. Slowly, he sat down on the piano bench, holding the cassette in both hands. The room felt unbearably quiet now. Outside, waves crashed violently against the rocks below the cliffs. Keanu stared at the tape for what felt like forever. A part of him desperately wanted to hear her voice again. Another part feared whatever she left behind. Because beneath the grief, beneath the memories, something else had begun growing inside him since the lawyer's phone call. A question. A terrible question. Why did Eleanor insist he come alone? His gaze shifted slowly across the room once more. That's when he noticed it. A large sealed envelope resting carefully atop the fireplace mantel. He stood and approached it cautiously. Written across the front in dark ink were 6 words that made his stomach drop instantly. The truth must wait until the will is read. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Keanu Reeves stood motionless before the fireplace, staring at Eleanor's handwriting as rain tapped softly against the windows behind him. The words seemed to pulse in his mind. The truth must wait until the will is read. A cold unease crept through his chest. Eleanor had always spoken carefully, choosing her words with quiet precision. She never dramatized things, never played games. If she wrote something like this, she meant it. Keanu ran his thumb slowly across the edge of the envelope but didn't open it. Not yet. The house suddenly felt different now, not just filled with memories but secrets. He exhaled slowly and stepped away from the fireplace, trying to steady himself. His eyes drifted toward the windows overlooking the ocean. Gray waves crashed violently against the rocks below the cliffs, sending white spray into the stormy air. Everything about the morning carried tension. Even the sea felt restless. A sharp knock at the front door broke the silence. Keanu turned immediately. For one strange second, his heart actually expected Eleanor to walk inside carrying groceries or tea like she always had. But reality settled back in quickly. When he opened the door, a tall, older man in a charcoal coat stood beneath the porch light holding a leather briefcase. "Mr. Reeves," he said gently. "Daniel Mercer," Keanu nodded once. "Come in." The lawyer stepped inside quietly, removing rain from his glasses with a handkerchief. His eyes wandered respectfully around the home before settling back on Keanu. "She kept everything exactly the same," Mercer said softly. "Yeah," Keanu replied, his voice distant. "Looks like she was waiting for someone to come back." The lawyer didn't answer. Instead, his gaze briefly landed on the sealed envelope atop the fireplace. "I see you found it." Keanu crossed his arms slowly. "You knew about this?" "She instructed me not to discuss its contents." That answer only deepened the knot tightening in Keanu's chest. Mercer carefully placed his briefcase on the kitchen table. "The reading is scheduled for noon. There's still some time if you'd prefer privacy." Keanu hesitated before asking quietly, "Did she suffer?" The lawyer's expression softened immediately. "No. According to the doctor, she passed peacefully in her sleep." Keanu lowered his eyes. Peacefully. He wanted to find comfort in that, but grief rarely listened to logic. Mercer reached into his briefcase and removed a small folded document. "She also left this for you before the official reading." Keanu accepted it cautiously. It wasn't a letter. It was a photograph. The image was old and slightly faded around the edges. A younger Eleanor stood smiling beside a dark-haired man Keanu didn't recognize. They stood near a shoreline somewhere, arms linked together. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then Keanu noticed the date scribbled in the corner. Years before she became his nanny. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Mercer adjusted his glasses. "I believe Ms. Whitmore wanted you to begin asking questions before hearing the full contents of the will." Keanu stared harder at the photograph. Something about the man bothered him. Not because he looked threatening, but because his face felt strangely familiar. Like someone Keanu had seen long ago and forgotten. "There's writing on the back," Mercer said gently. Keanu flipped the photograph over. His breath caught instantly. In Eleanor's handwriting were the words, "Some promises cost everything." A heavy silence settled between them. Keanu slowly placed the photograph down onto the table. "What exactly did Eleanor tell you about me?" "Very little," Mercer answered honestly. "But I handled several private matters for her over the years. She cared about you deeply." Keanu gave a faint, bitter smile. "Yeah, I know that part." But suddenly, he wasn't sure how much else he knew. The lawyer glanced toward the clock. "We should leave soon," Keanu nodded absent-mindedly. Before leaving, he walked through the house one more time. His fingers brushed against old furniture as he moved slowly through each room, almost as if saying goodbye to pieces of his childhood one last time. Then he stopped near the hallway closet. The door was slightly open. Inside hung Eleanor's familiar gray cardigan, the one she wore constantly during winter mornings while making tea. Seeing it there nearly shattered him again. He closed his eyes. And suddenly another memory surfaced. He was maybe 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table while Eleanor stitched a tear in his jacket. He remembered asking her why she never had children of her own. She had paused for a strangely long time before answering. "Life doesn't always give us the family we expect." At the time, he didn't understand the sadness in her eyes. Now he wondered if he ever truly knew her at all. An hour later, Keanu and Mercer drove through downtown Seattle beneath dark clouds and steady rain. The city passed in blurred reflections across the car windows, while silence filled the space between them. Finally, Keanu spoke. "You said she made very specific instructions." "Yes." "She seemed worried?" Mercer hesitated carefully. "Not worried. Then what?" The lawyer looked out at the rain for a moment before answering. "Determined." That single word sent another chill through him. The car eventually pulled beside a narrow brick building overlooking the harbor. A gold plaque near the entrance read, "Mercer and Holt Legal Services." Keanu stepped out slowly. The ocean wind hit him instantly, cold and sharp. For some reason, his instincts screamed at him to turn around. But he didn't. Inside, the office felt warm and strangely quiet. Wooden bookshelves lined the walls while soft jazz played faintly somewhere in the background. Mercer guided him toward a private conference room at the end of the hall. When the lawyer opened the door, Keanu stopped cold. The room was empty except for a single chair placed at the center of a long table. Only one, alone. Exactly as Eleanor requested. Mercer set his briefcase down carefully before looking at him with solemn eyes. "Mr. Reeves," he said quietly, "before we begin, I need you to understand something." Keanu felt his pulse quicken. "Your nanny did not consider this will an inheritance." A long silence followed. Then Mercer slowly unlocked the briefcase. She considered it a confession. The sound of the briefcase unlocking echoed through the quiet conference room like the click of a trigger. Keanu Reeves remained standing for a moment, unable to move. His eyes fixed on Daniel Mercer as the older man carefully removed a thick stack of documents tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Outside the large harbor windows, rain drifted across the gray Seattle skyline, blurring ferries and distant lights into ghostly shapes. The entire world felt muted, suspended in some strange space between memory and revelation. Keanu finally lowered himself into the chair. His chest felt tight. "A confession?" he asked quietly. Mercer nodded once. Those were Eleanor's exact words. The lawyer opened the first document carefully, almost reverently, as though he understood the weight of what sat between them. "She prepared these instructions nearly 12 years ago," he explained. "She updated portions over time, but one condition never changed." Keanu's throat tightened. "Which was?" "That you hear everything alone." A silence settled over the room. Mercer unfolded the first handwritten letter. Even from across the table, Keanu recognized Eleanor's elegant cursive immediately. For a second, he couldn't breathe. It felt like hearing a dead voice before the words were even spoken. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began reading softly. "Dear Keanu, if you are hearing this, then I am finally gone. And you are finally ready." Keanu lowered his eyes. Her voice formed naturally in his mind as the words were read aloud. Gentle, calm, steady as ocean waves. "There are truths I carried for most of my life. Not because I wished to deceive you, but because I promised someone I would protect you until the very end." A faint chill crept up Keanu's spine. Mercer continued. "You once asked me why I stayed during the hardest years. I told you someday you would understand. I pray that when this moment comes, you will forgive me." Keanu swallowed hard. Rain rattled softly against the windows behind him. Then Mercer reached for another document inside the folder. "This," he said carefully, "is where things become complicated." He slid an old photograph across the table. Keanu picked it up slowly. The image showed Eleanor much younger, standing beside the same dark-haired man from the earlier photograph. But this time, another person stood beside them, a woman holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. Keanu's breath caught instantly. The baby was him. His hands trembled slightly. "What is this?" he whispered. Mercer spoke cautiously now, choosing every word with care. The man in the photograph was named Richard Vale. Keanu frowned faintly. The name meant nothing to him. But Mercer's next sentence changed. "Everything. He was connected to your biological father." Silence exploded inside Keanu's head. For several seconds, he genuinely thought he misheard him. "My father?" Mercer nodded slowly. "Eleanor knew him before you were born." Keanu stared blankly at the photograph, his pulse pounding harder now. "That's impossible," he muttered. "She never talked about him." "No," Mercer agreed quietly. "She deliberately avoided it." Keanu stood abruptly, pacing away from the table as confusion surged through him. His thoughts crashed together violently. His father had always been a fragmented subject in his life. Distant, vague, painful. Questions that were never fully answered. Stories half told and quickly abandoned. But Eleanor? She had known something? All these years? He turned sharply. Why would she hide that from me? Mercer remained calm. Because according to Eleanor, there were consequences attached to the truth. Keanu's jaw tightened. What consequences? The lawyer hesitated. Then he opened another letter. Keanu, the world is not always kind to broken families. There were powerful people involved in circumstances you were too young to understand. A terrible feeling settled deep in Keanu's stomach. Mercer continued reading. When your mother struggled financially and emotionally, there were discussions, legal discussions, about where you would be placed. Keanu froze completely. What? The lawyer slowly reached for another document and slid it toward him. Keanu looked down. It was an official court, filing dated decades earlier. And across the top were words that instantly made his blood run cold. Temporary Child Welfare Review. Stared at the page in disbelief. No. His eyes moved lower, then stopped. There, near the bottom, appeared Eleanor Whitmore's signature, not as nanny, not as caretaker, but as temporary legal guardian. Keanu's knees nearly weakened beneath him. For one brief, horrifying second, childhood memories suddenly rearranged themselves in his mind. The nights at Eleanor's house, the long stretches away from home, the whispered adult conversations that stopped. Whenever he entered rooms, none of it had been accidental. Mercer's voice softened considerably. Protected you during a very unstable period. Keanu sank slowly back into the chair, unable to look away from the document. She was my guardian? For nearly 11 months. The room spun slightly. 11 months. Nearly a year of his childhood. Hidden from him. His breathing became shallow. She saved you from entering the foster system, Mercer said quietly. The words struck harder than anything else. Keanu pressed a trembling hand against his mouth. All his life, he believed Eleanor had simply helped raise him out of kindness. But this was sacrifice. This was something far deeper, Mercer. Carefully unfolded the final page in the stack. There's more. Keanu almost didn't want to hear it, but he nodded anyway. The lawyer began reading Eleanor's final paragraph aloud. There is one thing I must ask of you, my sweet boy. Do not hate your mother for what happened. She loved you more than her own life. She was drowning, and I was simply the one, standing close enough to pull you both ashore. Tears burned suddenly. Behind Keanu's eyes, he looked down at the photograph. Again, Eleanor holding him as a baby with quiet protectiveness. In her gaze, and for the first time, he realized something devastating. She had not stayed in his life out of obligation. She stayed because she chose him again and again for decades. Heavy silence filled the room after Mercer finished. Reading, then the lawyer slowly reached into the briefcase one final time. From inside, he removed a tiny silver key attached to a worn blue ribbon. He placed it gently on the table between them. Keanu stared at it. What does it open? Mercer looked at him carefully. According to Eleanor, the lawyer paused. The truth she could never say out loud. The silver key looked ordinary, small, tarnished with age. Its edges worn smooth by decades of careful handling. Yet as Keanu Reeves stared at it lying on the conference table, he felt an almost unbearable weight pressing against his chest. The truth she could never say out loud. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind over and over again. Outside, the rain had eased into a faint mist drifting across the harbor windows, but the storm inside him only deepened. His entire understanding of his childhood had begun unraveling within the last hour. Eleanor had been his guardian. She had protected him from being taken away, and somehow she had known secrets connected to his father. Nothing felt real anymore. Keanu reached forward slowly and picked up the key. The metal felt cold against his skin. Where is it? He asked quietly. Mercer closed the briefcase gently. Eleanor left instructions for me to give you an address after the reading. Keanu frowned faintly. Another address? The lawyer nodded. A storage property several miles north of her home. Privately owned. She rented it for over 40 years. 40 years. Keanu stared at him in disbelief. She kept something hidden for 40 years? Yes. A long silence followed. Then Keanu stood abruptly and walked toward the windows overlooking the harbor. Ferries moved slowly through the gray water below, while gulls circled overhead beneath heavy clouds. His reflection in the glass barely looked familiar anymore. For years, he had carried a quiet emptiness inside himself without fully understanding where it came from. Fame-filled schedules, success-filled headlines. But underneath it all, there had always been unanswered questions he learned not to ask. Now those questions were clawing their way to the surface. Behind him, Mercer spoke softly. "She loved you very much, Mr. Reeves." Keanu closed his eyes briefly. "I know." "No," the lawyer replied gently. "I don't think you understand yet." Those words lingered heavily in the room. An hour later, Keanu drove alone along the northern coastline with Eleanor's silver key resting on the passenger seat beside him. Mercer had offered to accompany him, but Keanu refused. This felt personal now. Painfully personal. The farther he drove from Seattle, the quieter the world became. Tall evergreens lined the winding roads, while ocean fog drifted low across the cliffs. Finally, he reached the address. It wasn't what he expected. No large building. No secret estate. Just a small weathered storage cabin hidden near the edge of a dense wooded property overlooking the sea. Keanu stepped out of the car slowly. Wind rushed through the trees above him, carrying the sharp scent of rain and salt water. Everything about the place felt isolated from time itself. Almost forgotten. He approached the cabin carefully, boots crunching over damp gravel. A rusted lock hung from the door. Hands trembling slightly, he inserted the silver key. For one brief second, he hesitated. Then he turned it. The lock clicked open instantly. Keanu pushed the door inward. Dust floated through pale beams of afternoon light cutting across the darkness inside. At first glance, the cabin looked simple. Old furniture, sealed boxes, shelves covered in blankets. But then he noticed something near the far wall. Photographs, dozens of them. His breath caught immediately. Slowly, he stepped closer. Every wall inside the cabin was covered with pictures from his life. Childhood photographs, teenage photographs, movie premieres, magazine clippings, candids the public had never seen. Eleanor had quietly documented nearly every stage of his life. Not obsessively, lovingly. Keanu stood frozen in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the realization that while the world watched him as a celebrity, Eleanor had always watched him simply as Keanu. Nothing more. Nothing less. His eyes drifted across the photographs until they landed on one image near the corner of the room. A picture of him sleeping as a child on Eleanor's couch. On the back, written carefully in faded ink, "The first night he finally slept without nightmares." Keanu's throat tightened painfully. He looked away quickly, emotions rising too fast to contain. Then he noticed the trunk. An old cedar chest sat beneath the photographs, locked with another small metal clasp already opened. Slowly he knelt before it. Inside were stacks of letters tied together with ribbon, legal documents, newspaper articles, and beneath everything else, a cassette recorder, the same one from Eleanor's house. Beside it rested a single tape labeled, "For the Day You Learn the Truth." Keanu stared at it for a long moment before carefully pressing play. Static crackled softly. Then Eleanor's voice filled the cabin. Weak with age, but unmistakably hers. "Hello, sweetheart." Keanu immediately lowered his head. The sound of her voice shattered something inside him. "If you're hearing this," Eleanor continued gently, "then I suppose Daniel finally convinced you to stop running from difficult things." Despite everything, a small broken smile crossed Keanu's face through his tears. That sounded exactly like her. The tape crackled softly again. "There's so much I wanted to tell you over the years. But I made promises, and promises matter." Keanu listened in silence. Outside, wind rattled the cabin windows while waves crashed faintly in the distance. "I need you to understand something before you hear the rest," Eleanor said softly. "You were never unwanted. Never abandoned. Not for a single moment. Tears slipped quietly down Keanu's face. Your mother loved you deeply. She was frightened, overwhelmed, and surrounded by people who cared more about control than compassion. Keanu closed his eyes tightly. Then Eleanor's voice became quieter. But there was one thing I never told you. The tape hissed faintly. And then came the sentence that made his entire world stop. The reason I stayed wasn't because I was hired to protect you. A long pause followed. It felt endless. Then Eleanor whispered the words that left him utterly speechless. I stayed because in every way that truly mattered, you became my son.